Avik. Welcome to the KLF blog. So history from the novels that you have previously written, and now stepping into the world of history, which you do not define as historical fiction, but writing about Darashuko himself, your perspective on it, and how this character gets viewed. Would you like to talk about it first?
Sure. So when I was writing this particular book, or even before that, right, I had done a business book, and therefore I had two options. One was to play it, the beaten path, the straight path, and follow it up with yet another business book, so more of the same, or to go beyond my comfort zone and do something that I'd never done before. So, just like many of us are film buffs and history buffs, I used to be both. And then I said, all right, I'm going to go beyond my comfort zone and take it up purely as a passion project. I'm not going to think of the readers. I'm not going to think of the market. I'm not going to think of how many copies this may or may not sell. I'm doing it purely for myself. And the other guy I did it for was Darashuko, of course.
So why Darashuko? There in the history of Mughal royalty, Akbar has been done over and over again. He is like the star of the show. Then there is Jahangir, and then if you have to think about the hopeless romantic, it's Shah Jahan. And then Aurangzeb being the bipolar character that he is. There is never really one straightforward narrative of this guy. But why did you fixate on Darashuko? What drove you into writing about Darashuko?
Primarily what you mentioned, right? Because we know so much, or apparently so much, about the other characters, right? Including right up to Bahadur Shah Zafar through the last Mughal. But very little about Darashuko, and yet he continues to haunt our popular imagination. There is this perception, there's this image of this, larger than life, almost saintly poet, philosopher, prince who could have been the Badshah, but did not quite make it because of his pugnacious brother. And I thought that was in itself a very interesting concept, and I wanted to explore that particular narrative. Is that all Darashuko was? Or were there many more sort of nuances and textures to his personality, to his psyche? And that was very interesting for me. And as a result of my research and as a result of the book, what I found out was that just like Aurangzeb in his own way, like Shah Jahan, like so many of the other great Mughals, he was an extremely, not just a fascinating, but complex character. It's not a very linear narrative. So yes, of course, he was a poet, he was a theologian, he was a chronicler, he was a historian in his own right, he was a scholar, he was a philosopher and a practicing Sufi of the Qadiri Silsila. But at the same time, the same person who was all of this and a calligrapher and the connoisseur of the arts and architecture, etc., etc., etc. At the same time, he was the same person who could be extremely cold and aloof and supercilious with the rank and mass of. I'm not talking about the rank and mass in terms of the common man, but the rank and file of the courtiers, the commanders, and very few people know about this. But he could be equally sort of cutting and dismissive of the Mughal or the Muslim commanders at the court, and the Rajputs one as well. So when I got all these additional textures and nuances, I said, okay, this is an incredible character, like really, really engaging, fascinating. I want to try and bring this to life.
You've written fiction, and talking about writing about the many facets of a character. With fiction, I think the author has the liberty to create as many facets as possible. But now that you're writing history, you're limited, but then you also have to carry more depth. How was that as a challenge, and how did you go on through the journey of it?
I think I was helped along the way by all of the research and all of the scholarship that's happened in the last 100 years. So all the way from Jodhanath Chowkar right up to Trotsky and beyond. So people have talked about Darashuko, people have discussed different facets of his life, and there are two books from the early part of the 20th century, one which is Kolikaranjan Kanungo, the first monograph on Darashuko in English back in the 1930s. Late 1930s, and then one from Bishwabharati in 1953, Vikramjit Hazrat, Life and Works of Darashuko. Those gave me quite a few I would say, data points about the various facets. And then when I started to explore them, that's when each of them sort of opened up avenues, opened up into a new room, as it were. And then what I did was hinged or leveraged the material, the data that was available to me, and worked that into a seamless narrative so that it would read like a story, almost like fiction. However, every page and the content and the data that you have in that page should be backed up by proper, authenticated historical research.
So it became his story.
Yeah, it became
Yeah,
his story.
yeah.
Indeed. Yeah.
So
Somebody's got to tell it.
somebody's got to tell it. One last thing, talking about empires and royalties that have come along the way in India, from the Delhi Sultanate to the Mughal Empire. Why? What do you think that sets the Mughal dynasty apart from all the so-called invaders that we have had in history, be it one generation after the other, and coming to colonialism? So, what makes Mughal stand out in this historic journey?
I think the degree of assimilation that the Mughals have shown has been, second to none in terms of empires. They initially came in as conquering armies, Babur's army. Pretty much the invader, but then he settles down in Delhi. And once he settles down, he has this constant grouse, constant cribbing about the heat of Hindustan, the dust of Hindustan, the flies. I don't like the people. He does not like anything. He does not like the climate. He doesn't much like the cuisine. He doesn't like the lack of gardens that he would have enjoyed during his childhood in Samarkand, so on and on and on. But at the same time, he makes it his home. And then with Humayun and Akbar, that feeling of belongingness is consolidated. And the assimilation over time, over 2.5 centuries, is absolutely mammoth. You take architecture, there's assimilation. You take music, you take cuisine, you take clothing, attire, fashion, anything you can think of. Philosophy, literature. There is a hugely, deeply sort of assimilative character or strength or power that the Mughals drew from different kinds of indigenous sources, every facet of culture that was available around that time.
Conglomerated it all
Yes.
and brought it together.
Yes.
So, other than Dara Shukho, which character in history fascinates you?
A lot of them, too many to list out. But think of another person who predates Dara Shukho by at least, 2.5 centuries, maybe, or even three. And he's supposed to be, so this is pre-Akbar, and he is celebrated as the original syncretic guy, and that's Amir Khusro.
Okay.
So what about him? So, I would love to do a narrative of him someday.
Well, we hope that that's the next book, and all the very best, Avik. I hope you have a wonderful time at Boimala and get lots of books for yourself. Thank you.